Sigmund Freud. You know the name, right? I mean, we've all talked about a Freudian slip, or maybe you've heard someone called anal retentive. His ideas are just everywhere. They're so deep in our culture, it's kind of hard to tell where they start and where we begin. So today, we're going to flip the script. We're putting the man himself on the couch to try and figure out his revolutionary and, yeah, really controversial impact on the way we think about ourselves.
And the scale of his influence is, well, it's just massive. I love this quote from the poet W.H. Auden back in 1940. He totally nailed it. Freud didn't just come up with a few interesting theories. No, he created a whole climate of opinion. It's like he completely changed the weather system for how we think about our own minds. So what is this climate of opinion? Well, it basically means that to even begin to understand Freud, you have to realize his ideas are baked into the very words we use every day to talk about ourselves. You know, our inner lives, what drives us, our deepest, darkest desires. Okay, so at his core, who was he? Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist, and he's the guy who founded psychoanalysis. But look, this wasn't just some new therapy. It was a completely new way of thinking about what makes people tick. It was a theory of the mind that was going to echo through the entire 20th century, and honestly, it still does today. But before he was this huge global icon, let's remember, he was just a doctor in Vienna. He had a practice, a family, and this really radical, almost wild ambition to draw a map of the hidden parts of the human mind. And his life really spanned this incredible period of change, both scientifically and politically. So he was born back in 1856, becomes a doctor in Vienna in 1881, and that's where he spends most of his life, cooking up all these theories. But then, and this is a dramatic turn, in 1938, with the rise of the Nazis, he's forced to flee to London, and he dies there in exile just a year later. So, let's get into the heart of his big project, mapping our inner world. This was his whole thing. He wasn't just trying to treat what they called nervous disorders back then. He was trying to create the first ever complete map of the human mind, especially all the parts that are hidden, even from ourselves. And this really leads to the fundamental question that Freud puts right in front of us. What's really driving what you think and what you do? Are we really these rational creatures in charge of our own brains, or are there deeper, hidden forces pulling the strings? Freud's answer was a huge, definite yes to that second one. And that brings us to maybe his most famous idea, that classic visual, the iceberg. For Freud, our conscious mind, everything we're aware of right now, that's just the tiny tip of the iceberg sticking out of the water. The real deal, the vast, powerful, and frankly, pretty chaotic part of who we are, that's all hidden beneath the surface, in the unconscious. Okay, so what's lurking down there in the deep, dark water? Well, first up, you've got the id. The id is pure primal instinct. It runs on what Freud called the pleasure principle. The easiest way to think about it is a screaming baby. It's hungry, it wants food, and it wants it now. That's the id. It's the part of you that demands instant gratification for all your urges, with zero concept of reality or right and wrong. It's just pure, raw want. Next up, you have the ego. The ego works on the reality principle. So if the id is that screaming baby, the ego is the adult in the room, trying to calm it down. The ego is your rational self, the part that has to negotiate between what the id wants and what the real world will actually allow. It's the voice that says, okay, yeah, you're hungry, but you can't just snatch the food off that guy's plate. Let's find a better way. And finally, there's the superego. This is your moral conscience. It's that internal voice of right and wrong that you got from your parents, from school, from society. It's the part that makes you feel guilty. So picture this. Your ego is stuck in the middle of a constant tug of war. On one side, you have the wild, impulsive id, and on the other, you have the strict, moralizing superego, a constant battle. Now, these ideas were so powerful, they didn't just sit on a shelf in some dusty book. Oh no. Freud built a whole global movement around them. And just like any big revolutionary movement, it was full of passionate loyalty, but also a ton of conflict and some pretty dramatic breakups. And the symbol of this whole movement, of course, became the couch. This is where the talking cure, as one of his patients famously called it, happened. The idea was for patients to practice free association, basically just say whatever pops into your head, no matter how weird or embarrassing or random it seems. The goal was to sift through all of that for clues about what was really going on down in the unconscious. So an inner circle started gathering in Freud's apartment way back in 1902. But here's the thing, Freud expected absolute loyalty to his ideas. This led to some massive splits with two of his brightest followers, Alfred Adler and Carl Jung. They eventually broke away to start their own schools of thought. The conflict got so heated that a secret committee of hardcore loyalists was actually formed just to protect Freud's original theories from what they saw as total heresy.
And that really brings us right up to today, because even now, Freud's legacy is, to put it mildly, intensely debated. On one hand, people see him as a foundational genius. On the other, he's seen as a deeply, deeply flawed figure whose ideas have been torn apart by critics.
So this gets us to the million-dollar question. Was any of this actually science? Well, on the plus side, it gave us talk therapy, which is the foundation for almost all psychotherapy today. Huge. But on the other side, critics like the famous philosopher Karl Popper pointed out a massive problem. His theories are unfalsifiable. What's that mean? It means you can't prove them wrong. Think about it. If a patient's actions fit Freud's theory, great, the theory is confirmed. But if the patient's actions didn't fit the theory, Freud could just say, that's denial, which also conveniently confirms the theory. It's a win-win for the theory. And that kind of circular logic is why some people call it a pseudoscience.
And the critiques definitely don't stop with the science part. Feminist thinkers in particular have seriously challenged for its work. I mean, infamous theories like penis envy were attacked for basically defining female development as a reaction to, well, not having something. Critics argue that his whole perspective was just soaked in the patriarchal views of his Victorian time, painting women as kind of inferior or incomplete versions of men.
And so, here we are, right back at the couch. It really is the perfect symbol for his whole legacy, isn't it? It was meant to be a place for healing and figuring yourself out, but it's also the very spot where these theories were born. Theories that still kick off these huge, important debates about science, about gender, and about what it even means to be human.
So, after all that, what are we supposed to make of Sigmund Freud today? Was he a genius who cracked the code of the unconscious mind? A total charlatan who just made up an elaborate pseudoscience? Or maybe something in between? A brilliant but flawed pioneer who just couldn't escape the time he lived in? Honestly, the debate is nowhere near over. And maybe the way you answer that question says as much about you as it does about him.